Kiss me, kiss me, infect me with your love and fill me with your poison. Take me, take me, wanna be a victim, but it feels like shit. Your touch is everything, it's supernatural. Extra.
Good evening, you're watching the Polymath podcast. My name is Ashraq, and I'm very excited to be here with you today because we've got a big show. We've got lots to talk about and lots to get into. Before we get into our feature story for tonight, I've been told that this is perhaps the most inconsistent podcast of all time. This is the most inconsistent podcast that they've ever seen in their lifetimes. Well, let me tell you something. Everyone has their own personal lives. We've got all our own grind going on. We've got our own stuff, our projects, work, and other stuff. So I've been grinding. And speaking of which, do check out the new video on our dear friend, who's a friend of the show, Olive's Feet, Brother Abdullah, his new episode, or a new vlog, where we feature the Polymath podcast. We put in a couple plugs. Brother Mahdi steps in, puts in a plug at the very end as well. So we've got the ecosystem building, right? We've got the Muslim ecosystem in place, and we are ascending. 2026 is all about ascension, and that's what we're doing. And speaking of inconsistency, we're gonna get into a lot of the stories that we've missed over the last couple weeks. The last month has been unbelievable. We started the month by the kidnapping of Maduro, and I call it the extraction of Nicolas Maduro that happened with Venezuela. And then you also had the World Economic Forum in Davos, and as we said, they're going to introduce the Board of Peace. We're going to have a Palestinian technocratic government in place for the regime operations in Gaza. And on top of that, you have had the fallout of the US-led world order. You had the Greenland confrontation going on with Denmark. Mark Rutte steps in, kind of diffuses the tensions, and speaks to the Europeans, speaks to Trump, and looks like that side of the issue is cooled down. The temperature is down right now. Now, the core concern here is what's going on right now after all of that transpired. You've had Netanyahu visit the White House once again in the span of over 30 days. It's like I'm doing another episode, Netanyahu decides to visit the White House again. And this time it's no different. It's all about Iran again, because as we've seen, the escalation in the Arabian Sea it's been tremendous. There's been tremendous development, and we're gonna get into the show today. So our feature story for today is all about how the United States is building up its forces for an imminent war, or that's where we're heading to with Iran. And it's absolutely unbelievable. What I also skipped was the Epstein files. We had the release of over 3 million Epstein files by the DOJ, by the Attorney General, who had the folder on her table, and she said that she's going to release it. And after that, we didn't see any release of any files until Thomas Massie Ro-Khanna. They pushed over Congress, they pushed over the DOJ to finally disclose these files. And slowly we're getting 3 million files, even though they're redacted. Now, even with the redaction, congressmen could go in and see the unredacted files. But it's a lot of process there. And then you also had the Attorney General Pam Bondi's congressional hearing very recently, and it's kind of crazy. It just boggles the mind when you're asking the Attorney General about the Epstein files, and she brings up something completely outside of her portfolio. She starts talking about the Dow hitting 50,000, about NASDAQ. That's totally not your portfolio, Pam Bondi. And these guys at this point need to be kicked out of office. Very frankly, Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, Dan Bajin is already out. He's back to his podcast Sphere. And there's been growing calls within the administration, within the MAGA base, for impeaching Kristi Noem and Trump's own border czar, Dom Homan, because they're not even getting the deportation stuff done. I'm not in line with those things. I'm not aligned with those agendas of the Trump administration, but it was very, very much on board with the disclosure of the Epstein files, and well, they're happening in some limited fashion, and looks like they've conceded. They're probably in their losing game. 2026 for the Trump administration is not looking like they're ascending, but more like they're descending. They're releasing the files because they've been pressured into such a situation. They're going into a probable war with Iran, and there's an escalation on that. And Trump is shaming the Israeli president for not issuing a pardon, not giving a pardon to Netanyahu in his corruption trial. And with all of this going on, it's totally and absolutely unbelievable. We've all just kind of forgotten about this war with Iran that's unfolding in the region, that's basically hanging by a thread. And Netanyahu, he flew in last Wednesday, I believe. It was Wednesday. He flew into the US to meet Donald Trump for the second time in the span of a month. The second time we're doing an episode of the Polymath podcast, right? He's been forcing Donald Trump to finally pull the trigger and go in and bomb Iran for the second time. And this time, he just totally wants a regime change operation to succeed. And the situation right now on the ground, it's a pure Mexican standoff. You have the American strike force package, the USS Abraham Lincoln in the Arabian Sea, and you have swarms of Iranian suicide drones in the Arabian Sea, which are ready to strike and command. There was a little bit of confrontation when an Iranian reconnaissance drone was hovering around the warships in the Arabian Sea, and they had to shoot it down. So we're just at the brink of a conflict. And then you also have every proxy from Iraq to Yemen are already on a 15-minute alert. So everyone's basically on hair trigger alert, and they've got weapons and guns and missiles all pointed at each other. And with just single command, you're just a single step away from an all-out regional war. But before we kind of get into the details of the situation right now on the ground, we got to go back. We like to go to the very bottom of this. To get to the very bottom of this, we need to go back to June 2025, which is when the second Trump administration actually began to engage with Iran on a military front, on a diplomatic front. So when the 12-day war between Israel and Iran was escalating, you had the Israelis bombing Tehran, not only Tehran, but also the other provinces in Iran. They're hitting these other provinces. They start off the attack by going for Natanz, I believe, the Natanz enrichment site. They struck the Natanz enrichment site. They attacked some essential critical infrastructure within Iran, and they've been bombing Iran for those 12 days, and it was escalating. It was escalating to a stage where the Israelis had to have Donald Trump step in to support and assist them in those attacks. And Trump came in, he blew up most of Iran's nuclear facilities. He bought in the GBU bomber, the GBU bombs, the B-2 bombers. He blew up what people were speculating if he would attack the Fordow enrichment site. He attacks Iran's enrichment site, and then Iran retaliates. They go after the US's Al-Udeid military base in Qatar, and then, as most of you know, the conflict was over, or briefly over. But this entire set of events made everything worse for the Iranian economy. It induced a source of economic pain. It created an economic pain which became the key trigger for the protests, which would explode right at the end of December. And now, the last week of December, as we covered in our first episode, Netanyahu goes in to meet Trump, and he tries to bring up the Iran issue, which was the most central part of his talks with Donald Trump. And then he brings up the issue of the Iranian ballistic missiles program. Previously, it was the concern of the Iranian nuclear program. Now, the goalposts are shifting. You have the Iranian ballistic missile program, which is now a threat. And then he keeps pleading with Donald Trump to bomb Iran once again. And then you have these protests emerge out of nowhere in the first week of January. And it's important to note, in January, you had the World Economic Forum in Davos. This is where Trump's Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, I bet you never heard about this guy. So he tells Fox News in an interview that President Trump had ordered Treasury and our OFAC division, which is the Office of Foreign Assets Control, to put maximum pressure on Iran. And it's worked because in December, their economy collapsed. We saw a major bank go under. The central bank has started to print money. There is a dollar shortage, not able to get imports, and this is why the people took to the street. So this is economic statecraft. No shots fired, and things are moving in a very positive way here. So this, if anything, is a clear indictment of US economic warfare against Iran. And then in January, you have this protests go out of control. Iranian economy just gets worse and worse. Now there is a currency collapse. The protests go completely out of control. And before we get into this, it's very important to address this, because we're going to have a lot of supporters of the Iranian regime who will completely try to deny, and they're still denying, any foul play by the internal security services. It is as if the regime forces are incapable of violence of any kind. So let's get that out of the way. Now, here's the other consideration that the mainstream media has failed to consider. But some of the media outlets, like the Financial Times, they do cover this. And there have been multiple reports of presence of numerous masked men clad in all black, armed with heavy automatic rifles and Kalashnikovs. They're going after government offices, they're shooting government soldiers, they're trying to take over government buildings, and this is no longer a protest. This is clearly an insurgency movement, and at some level this becomes terrorism. This becomes domestic terrorism. And no one can deny the extent of involvement of the Israeli intelligence services and the U.S. intelligence services in this protest. And they've been involved in extensive industrial sabotage, economic warfare, and regime change operations ever since the revolution of '79 in Iran. And Israel's been conducting these regime change operations for decades. For decades, they've been doing this. And they have a strategy in place. They call it the Alliance of the Periphery, which is essentially they go out and they seek out these minority groups within the Middle East and they ally with them. And they try to advance Israeli national interest in the region with the support of these minority forces by providing them the arms and weapons and their directions and blueprints and maps of intelligence and how to act. And they've implemented this strategy for the longest time to break apart the regional powers that seek to threaten Israel's dominance. Not only their dominance, but also their occupation in West Bank and Gaza, and also in Lebanon. And as a result, you can see how this US-aligned forces, and that is the Kurdish separatist forces, which are very much existent in Iran as much as they are in Iraq and in Syria. And they happen to work in tandem with Israel, or they're pursuing interests that are very much aligned with Israeli interests. And they're trying to do these operations against the governments of Syria, Iraq, and Iran. And that is very suspicious. So essentially what these groups represent is Israel's physical footprint in the region. They are sort of Israel's ground force against the regional powers that seek to threaten Israel's dominance. And so you have these forces present within these regions. And now, since we're talking about Iran, you also have this constant industrial sabotage by Israel against the Iranian economy, and then you also have this economic warfare by the second Trump administration against Iran and its people. And as such, the state of Iran's economy has endured a severe and a significant degradation over the past couple months. Now, as the situation on the ground got worse, Trump saw an opportunity. He rapidly escalated the conflict by imposing a 25% tariff on any country that seeks to do business, that is engaged in business with the Iranian government. And then he tells the protesters that help is on the way, and he begins to review strike options against the Iranian government. And reportedly, he was about to strike Iran. And, well, in time, it was called off right at the last minute because the United States did not have enough firepower to defend its own bases in the Middle East, which Iran has vowed to retaliate against, which has vowed to attack them. And the US also didn't have enough forces to finish off the Iranian regime. And they also didn't have these defensive assets in the region to kind of fend off Iranian retaliatory strikes. So what he does, he calls in an armada. He calls in an American armada. He calls in the USS Abraham Lincoln. With it, he brings in the air defense units, the Super Hornets, the Hawkeyes, the Seahawks, the Navy destroyers, the missile cruisers, and a nuclear attack submarine. On top of that, there's already 50,000 military personnel who are stationed within the Middle East. They have THAAD systems, Patriot missile batteries. They have this effort, this overall force maximizing effort in the region in order to escalate more tensions in the region. And this is a strategy to build more firepower, to build more forces in the region. Now we have reports that Trump ordered the Pentagon to send in the USS Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier and its strike group to the Middle East to kind of boost US forces in the region and escalate this even further. Now, it's important to know that the Ford is the largest warship in the American arsenal. It was sent in Venezuela, and it was positioned in the Caribbean before they did their operation, their extraction operation, their kidnapping operation of Nicolas Maduro. And it also is composed of fighter jets. They have Tomahawk missiles, and it has like a bunch of other destroyers and ships and whatnot. So it's going to just add on to this offensive posture against Iran in the Arabian Sea. It's just hiding tensions. And right on the last week of January, Trump issues an ultimatum. He says that the Iranian regime will be toppled if they don't give in to his demands, which were that Iran had to stop its ballistic missiles program, and it needs to stop supporting its proxy militias in the region. And on top of that, they would have to give up their existing stockpile of enriched uranium to the United States and practically hand over all its nuclear facilities to the United States. So basically, he wants Iran to capitulate and give up all its defense capabilities to the United States and agree to the US's maximalist demands. Now, before we get into more about the timeline, I want to get into why the US most likely attacked Iran. And that is because of the Trump Doctrine and why it is kind of important in this regard as it pertains to the use of military force. Now, first, we need to really understand how the Trump Doctrine actually works here. So Donald Trump, he uses military force, and this has been exemplified in his previous military operations. We've seen this. He uses military force to conduct very short one-off strikes within any region, within any part of the world, because the US has extensive firepower spread out within the world. And he uses military force that, like, he conducts operations that does not require long-term troop deployments. And the goal is always to leave a very small footprint and to keep everything alight so that he can just go in, strike, and then just walk out, so that he doesn't get bogged down in a longer protracted, dragged out conflict, which is why he uses military force in a very quick, calculated, and strategic way. And this is where it's more important to understand the Trump rationale. The Trump rationale is to use force in a way to show that he is serious, to signal resolve, to show that he can amp up the pressure, and if need be, he will escalate at will, which he's doing right now in the Middle East. This posturing, this offensive posturing against Iran, this is all about that. And here's a core element of this. He keeps all military operations below the trigger threshold, because anything above that will create a public backlash. And he doesn't want public backlash because at the end of the day, Donald Trump is a showman. He's all about the show. He's all about the optics. Now, because Americans react very strongly to big wars, that is why you have this trigger threshold. But limited small strikes like the one we've witnessed during Christmas, they were a totally different breed, and they are quite often a totally different breed. They rarely make it to the news cycle, and even if they do, there's no long-term reliability to deal with, which especially now is important because you have the midterm elections quite ahead of him. And I believe the Trump administration is very concerned with it, but at the same time, they're not performing well with regards to any of the things, any of the policies, any of the dreams that they've tried to sell. And here's the most important element of the Trump doctrine as it relates to the use of military force. the most important element is success. Now, Donald Trump is only going to authorize a military operation if it can produce a definite, visible success. It doesn't have to be credible, but it has to be visible. Credible, it depends on the case, but it has to be visible. It has to be very much in full view of the world so that he can show that he's had a military success. Now he's moving on to the next thing. This represents one of his mentor's most important rule. We're talking about Roy Cohen here. You can never admit defeat. You only can admit wins, only wins, the big wins that you can offer. Now, these operations are ones that don't necessarily require permission or like backing from Congress, which is precisely why he pursues these operations in order to advance his agenda. And now, here's why this is relevant. The reason why Trump hasn't pursued a military operation with regards to Iran is precisely because the Iranians have made it very, very clear that it won't be like last time that you attack us, we do an attack of show, and then it's all over. This time, if the Americans attack, it's going to be an all-out regional war. And this means that Iran is signaling they're ready to risk it all. And that is a rational move that you should be willing to escalate, because there's no incentive when the United States is trying to change the regime. They're effectively trying to change the government. They're trying to topple the government in Iran. Because and it's also about responding to one of the greatest superpowers in the world, that is the United States. But a regional war of this level, it will not remain limited to Iran. And in actual fact, it will inevitably have its spillover effects within the Middle East, where you might have a scenario where Iranian ballistic missiles are raining down across the Middle East. Iranian ballistic missiles and its hypersonic missiles, which are very difficult to sort of detect. The Iranian missiles raining over major capitals of Gulf countries in the region against the American military bases that they're hosting. What you can see, what you can understand here, through a very simple, common perspective, is that it is already a high stakes situation. And there's only one force that is always trying to escalate this even further, and that is now Donald Trump. That is Israel. And the US is escalating, of course, but they also want an off-ramp now. The Iranians want an off-ramp too, but at the same time, they're not willing to give up. They're not willing to give up their nukes. They're not ready to give up their ballistic missiles program. They're not ready to give up their entire defense strategy, national defense strategy, to the Israelis and the Americans. But if Trump is going to attack Iran, this is what he needs to know. In any attack scenario with Iran, it's definitely going to be a long and protracted war, unless he has a different strategy in mind to totally finish off the Iranian regime. Because Iran is not going to accept getting bombed every 6 months. And now they have all the incentives to declare a total war against the United States, its allies in the region, and all of the military bases that are being hosted in the region. And if Donald Trump, he wants this spectacular military success that he called the Israeli strikes, he has to kill off Donald Trump with the full force of the United States Army, its naval forces, its air force, and the Israeli defense forces and its air force, its navy, and everything. They have to kill off the Iranian regime. They have to, and that means to execute the Ayatollah, the supreme leader of Iran. They have to get Khamenei, they have to totally finish off the IRGC, and they have to render them absolutely defenseless without a successor, and taking out all of their defense capabilities, which is practically inachievable. This is not something the United States or Israel or any country for that reason can do without inheriting a regional mess. And it's going to cause a regional destabilized phase for the longest time, which we had with Iraq. And there you had the rise of terror forces, as we've discussed in our previous episode of how the regime change operation went down in Iraq. They got Paul Bremer in, and they inherited this mess. Donald Trump doesn't want to do that. He operates on a different level. So I'm very sure that he understands this. But at the same time, with these high stakes situations, you never know how far the situation can get to, what could be the possible outcomes of such a situation, of such an escalation, without it actually happening. Anyways, we've spoken a great deal about the US's defense capabilities and the amount of force they're bringing into the region. Now, let's not act as if Iran is like a third world, ancient, backward military. They have a pretty strong military. They've got enough force in the region to kind of try to defend themselves, to resist, and deal heavy blows to the US Army. And now this is according to the CEO of Dragonfly, which is a key drone defense partner in the United States for the government, of course. The CEO, Cameron Shell, he says that Iran has created an effective asymmetric threat against highly sophisticated military systems. And that is, he's talking about the United States. Basically, the Iranians, they realized that the only way they can win these battles or win a potential war against the United States is through asymmetric warfare. And if you look into the 2002 Millennium Games, which was sort of this war game exercise between the United States and what was probably Iran, they spent nearly $500 million to simulate a war game between the United States and potentially Iran. And they found out, the Americans, they found out that they were taking significant damages when their enemies, possibly the Iranians, started to use asymmetric tactics, and they had to suspend the game. They had to suspend the war game exercise. So this is a simulated war game exercise that they do, and they had to suspend it. So now you have, in actual fact, you have a US Armada right next to Iran, and the Iranians could use their cheap, mass-produced drones, thousands and thousands of them, to create these saturation attacks and overwhelm the American defense systems by launching hundreds and hundreds of them at once to take out their defense systems on these American ships that are marching towards Iran. And one of the key things to note here is the American defense system, which are notably Aegis and the Phalanx, which are modern US systems. They are not built to absorb attacks from these drone swarms. The USS Abraham Lincoln, which is in the region now, is a key target for attacks of such kind because they're big and slow. They're like a sitting duck in the region waiting to be attacked. And on the other side, you have these Iranian drones, which are low cost. They have these low cost warheads which are loaded onto them. They're like one-way kamikaze drones. They will fly right under target, and they will blow up. So essentially, in such attack scenarios, what you will have is the Americans burning millions against each drone, millions of dollars against each drone, and the Iranians essentially taking out defense billion dollars of worth of defense systems with their cheap hundreds and hundreds of drone swarms, and they will essentially flip the math. And that is what an attack scenario could possibly look like in the battlefield. Anyways, now let's get back to the timeline. Now, the US allies in the region, namely Saudi Arabia, you have Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey. Ever since the escalation has been growing between the Trump administration and the Iranian government, they tried to step in. They tried to initiate lobbying efforts. Turkey said, "You know what, guys, we gotta negotiate this out." And Saudi Arabia steps in for the first time, and they don't want a war. They don't want a regional war. They don't want to have their bases, the U.S. military bases that they're hosting in their own country, to be attacked by Iran. And they don't necessarily want to invite a total destabilization effort by Israel, and because that is in actual fact doesn't look good for any of the regional allies of the United States. And if all of a sudden you have missiles raining down on your country, that brings more and more tensions. That drives up the tension, and you'll have the markets going up. Economic progress that the Gulf countries are looking forward to is necessarily not going to come. So now, C. Witkoff, who's this U.S. special envoy to the Middle East, he visits Israel. And Netanyahu starts sharing the latest intelligence that the Mossad has gathered on Iran, and he shares it with Witkoff, and he tells Witkoff, "You know what? You can't trust Iran. You can't trust Iran in any negotiation effort," and he tries to make sure that the negotiations fail way before they even start in Oman. And then the negotiations begin in Oman. There was absolutely no deal. It began around 2 weeks ago. There was absolutely no deal. We had the first round of talks. Iran made it very, very clear. The government made it very clear. They want to only talk about the nuclear file. They're open to negotiating on the nuclear issue. They're not going to even talk about the ballistic missile program. Essentially, this is their core defense capability. They don't want to give up their ballistic missile program and get bombed by Israel again and again. So they're not willing to give up the ballistic missile program. They don't want to even talk about the proxy network they have. But the US on the other side, they're pushing for a comprehensive framework that not only covers nuclear, that also covers their missile program, the proxy network in the region. And Iran is maintaining their line. They're insistent. They won't give up their nukes. They won't give up what they call, they've sent one of their big guys, the big guns, to negotiate, Largiani, who happens to be one of the top national security advisors to the Supreme Leader. And he is a key figure in the Security Council, the National Security Council. And he's also played his part in the nuclear negotiating team before. I believe it was probably with the Obama administration. So he is the guy. He's Iran's guy who's dealing with the U.S. right now, and they've insisted they don't want to give up what they call their inalienable right of nuclear enrichment, and the U.S. has to accept that. So it looks like that Iran is not going to give up anytime soon with regards to its missile program or its nuclear program. Now, I want to mention what happened at the meeting, because last time our entire show was all about what happened at the meeting with Netanyahu and Trump. This time, it's been neither here nor there. Trump, after the talks with Netanyahu, said that there reached no definitive agreement on how to move forward with Iran. Now, here's what Netanyahu said. He said, I said that any agreement must include not just the nuclear issue, but also the ballistic missiles and the Iranian proxies in the region. Now, Trump says that after the meeting, he says that there was nothing definitive reached other than I insisted that negotiations with Iran will continue to see whether or not a deal can be consummated. And then after the talks, he said in a social media post, if it can, I let the Prime Minister know that it will be a preference. He's essentially saying that we are going to prefer a deal over a potential war. Now, the core problem here is that Trump might show that he has a preference for the deal, but the core problem here is, which is causing the deadlock in the negotiations and practically in every effort, every diplomatic effort with Iran and the United States, is that the mutual distrust. And it seems the negotiations once again, it looks like it has earmarks of a tactic by the United States to buy more time and concentrate the region with more of its forces, which it is doing right now by calling in a second carrier strike group, and essentially overwhelm Iran. Last year when Netanyahu met Trump, he pressured him to bomb Iran. This is before the December talks at Mar-a-Lago. This is right before June, I believe. Netanyahu, he meets Trump and he wants Trump to bomb Iran. Every single time he sees Donald Trump, he just wants him to bomb Iran. And Trump resisted. He said instead he's going to call for a 60-day deadline to negotiate a deal with the Iranians on the nuclear matter. And after that, he's going to war. And exactly like the recent talks in Iran, the first round of talks were all not about the deal, but about the frameworks of a deal. And later, by the third round of negotiations, by the third round of talks, Witkoff goes out. He tells the negotiators, he tells the Iranians that the American position on the nuclear file is very clear and it's non-negotiable. You would have to give up your existing program, your existing facilities, all of them to the United States. It is non-negotiable. There is a zero tolerance maximum pressure campaign against Iran since last year. And right before the next set of talks were scheduled to even begin, Israel sneaks in a surprise attack on Iran, and the US joins in. We mentioned this before. This is another story that sort of transpires last year. And this time, it just seems no different. Now, there has been some new information that the Trump administration has recommended that US-flagged commercial vessels heading east into the Strait of Hormuz should avoid Iran's territorial sea, and that they move closer to Oman's territorial waters. And this advisory will remain in effect until August 8th. And this date is very important here, August 8th, which means that they are going to drag this out, conflict, for as long as they can. And I believe they want a distraction at some level so that they can proceed with some sort of a limited strike on Iran. Which, if they see that they have an option that they could strike Iran at the same time, get away with it, and not risk an all-out war. If that's a scenario that Donald Trump has a strike option for, then that could possibly manifest. Now, last week, Trump, he also said that we have plenty of time, if you remember Venezuela. We waited around for a while, and we are in no rush. And he also says that he's going to hold talks for Iran for as long as he likes. But he wants to get it done. But he wants to get a deal done within the next month. And it should happen quickly. They should agree very quickly. That's what he says. So he's willing to wait it out. He's willing to negotiate. And at least that's a visible effort from the Trump administration until he is forced by Netanyahu and his Israel lobby in the United States. I don't know what they have on him that they could just pressure and he just acts. But now that Netanyahu's visited the White House, he might once again be putting maximum pressure on Iran to get a deal, to get a humiliating deal for the Iranians, which the Iranians will never accept. The Iranians will never concede, and that is exactly what Israel wants. A deal that Iran cannot accept, and if there is no deal, Iran would have to be bombed into submission by the United States and, of course, Israel. Israel would join in. But even if, let's say, even if by any providence of God, let's say the US and Iran, they find an off-ramp and they cut a deal and they de-escalate. Let's say the US repositions its forces out of the Middle East. They get a deal with the Iranians on all of these issues. Let's say the Iranians concede and it's not humiliating. Let's say all of these things happen. You know who's going to escalate this? Who's going to come in and spoil the negotiation once again? Clearly, definitely, visibly, Israel. Israel has always and will always be a destabilizing force in the region. And they have been engaging in such efforts ever since this country was founded, this occupation regime was founded, and they will leave no stone unturned in order to break the region apart, in order to advance their totally fantastical blueprint that they have for a greater Israel. And it seems as if these blueprints that we even talked about earlier in the show, the alliance of the periphery, this is something that Ben Gurion himself came up with. Ben Gurion being one of the founders of the state of Israel. It's been that long. They've also have their version of the divide and conquer. The Iran plan didn't make a proper publication about this by the Israeli military, but there were snippets of some details shared in some newspaper somewhere, and that's how the Israeli government loves to play these games. That's how the Israelis love to play these games. They want to share certain sets of information with the public in order to show their military prowess, their intelligence prowess, and they want to show the world that they're capable of great feats. But they're also willing to push the United States to the very, very point where the US would have to sacrifice itself in order to achieve and manifest Israel's expansionist dreams. And these dreams, it just looks so fantastical, as if they can never be true. But Trump, in order to fix this issue, fix this problem with Iran that they have, Iran is not a threat to the United States. The Iranian nuclear program is not a program that was supposed to be weaponized. The Ayatollah has his fatwa against nuclear weapons. They have abandoned efforts to weaponize nuclear weapon, but at the same time, every single thing that you guys have been doing since last year, even I've been advocating for the Iranians to get a nuclear weapon, because at this point, the ultimate national security strategy would be a nuclear weapon, would be a nuclear bomb to guard the Iranian government. And as such, you would have to witness a horizontal nuclear proliferation where Saudi Arabia gets a nuclear weapon, and following that, there's going to be a lot of other regimes that get nuclear weapon. Israel already has a nuclear weapon. They've always said it. They've said that we have other defense capabilities and whatnot. And Trump now, more than ever, he needs to be working with Turkey, with Syria, with Saudi Arabia, and the other Gulf countries, with the exception, of course, the notorious Emirates. Because if anything, they've been trying to do everything that Israel wants. They've been as anti-Muslim of a force, anti-Islamic of a force in nature, in their attitudes in the region. And they've been trying to cause a lot of issues with regards to Yemen and Sudan. And that is what the conflict between Saudi Arabia and UAE is all about. It's gotten to a point that no one makes a secret of it. I believe, who was it? I don't exactly remember. There was a U.S. congressman who recently said that, you know what, the United States and the Saudi Arabia and UAE, they have to knock it off. The conflict they had to they need to just knock it off. Forget about that. Focus on Iran. Focus on countering Iran. Saudi Arabia wants to counter Iran. Their defense minister Khalid bin Salman, he goes into the United States in order to talk with the United States officials about. He speaks to Marco Rubio. He probably speaks to Hegseth. I'm not sure. He speaks to key officials within the Trump administration, and he speaks to leaders of some top Jewish organizations, including the ADL. Within the United States, he speaks to them, and he says that essentially the message that has been conveyed is that we don't want to have a scenario where Iran is attacked and that creates a regional destabilization. Rather, we want to focus on something entirely different. We want to pursue our vision, well, that they have a vision 2030 that they're focusing on right now. At the same time, they also don't want to embolden the Iranian regime. That's the message of the Saudi government. And the Saudi government has been recently taking a lot of they've been using a lot of anti-Israel rhetoric in their media. This has been prevalent in Saudi media. And you had the ADL, which stepped in. They said that, you know what, the Saudi government, you guys should be very careful about anti-Semitic rhetoric in your media. Saudi Arabia was like, we're not pursuing anything anti-Semitic. We are trying to bring in peace. Netanyahu says, you know what, if you guys actually want peace in the region, you should not speak to the other side of peace. And Israel and its notorious cronies in the United States are all collectively lobbying against Iran. They want to unite these two countries, the UAE and Saudi Arabia, in order to focus and kind of escalate against Iran. But driven by their own national interests, Saudi Arabia is not, Qatar is not going to pursue such a direction, or hopefully they don't pursue such a direction where Iran gets attacked, Iran goes after all of these Middle East bases, and it turns out into a regional war. We don't want to see such a situation, because at the end of the day, these conflicts don't stay limited to their own regions either. We see its spillover effects in the entire world. The price of oil is going to go up. We're going to ride a car or a bike. That will be essentially your choice. You will be pushed back, like people who lived during the time where King Faisal had imposed the oil embargo on the United States. They know how the price of oil spiked, and they had to deal with it in their daily lives, and the effect of it was very, very real. So now he needs to, Donald Trump, he needs to work with these countries and stabilize the region. He needs to focus on stabilizing the region, slowly pull out of the region as his national security, what was it? I believe it was the National Defense Strategy memo. It was published earlier in 2026, I believe. And they've stated it clearly that the Trump administration's core focus is to slowly pull out of the region, and he should do so and focus on the Western Hemisphere or wherever he wants to focus. He shouldn't even focus on the Western Hemisphere, but if he wants to do so, that's his prerogative. He needs to pursue his own promises. He needs to pursue his own national security strategy memo, as he said it in the memorandum, that it will be to pull out of the region. He needs to pull out of the region, exactly as this was prioritized in his agendas. It was the national security strategy, my bad, and it's in 2026. He needs to pursue that, and he needs to radically, since he's a radical president, he also needs to radically disentangle from Israel and Israeli national interests, that which the United States have always, since its founding, religiously pursued. I believe since the Truman administration, they religiously pursued supporting the Israelis to the very end. Unwavering support to the Israelis. They need to end this for their own good, for the very lives of American soldiers, if they don't care about the rest of the world. Anyways, that's all I got for you today. We've got a show after a long time. We'll probably do another show within the next week, or maybe not. Let's see what happens. Last time I made a promise, you know what happened. So remember to smash the subscribe button, smash the like button, leave a comment, and let me know what you think about the show. I will be on the air, ostensibly, once every week. Or maybe not. Who knows? Let's see. Special thanks to everyone who's tuned in. We love you. Keep following the show. We'll see you soon. I'm getting a couple updates from some of the collaborators in this project. But I'll see you soon. Until then, have a great day and Godspeed.
Get your soul, just telling me.